is Arthur Vance, but in here, in this concrete square where time seems to have died, everyone just calls me Artie. I am 66 years old now, and if you close your eyes for a second, maybe you can hear what I hear every night. The incessant hum of the fluorescent bulb that never goes out, and the metallic snap of the locks echoing down the corridor. I am sitting on my narrow bunk, feeling the weight of 34 years of wrong decisions crushing my tired shoulders, while the smell of cheap disinfectant and old sweat permeates the walls. I am not a monster, though the state says otherwise on every piece of paper that carries my registration number, 74021. What you are about to hear is the sincere account of a man who traded a whole life for 5 minutes of blind, stupid loyalty. Most people believe that life ends when the heart stops beating, but I discovered it can end much sooner, while you are still breathing the damp air of a maximum security cell. I am still here, locked behind this solid steel door, watching the dust dance in the single beam of light that enters through the slit of the grate in the late afternoon. It has been 34 years since I knew what it was like to walk on a sidewalk without chains on my feet, or to smell the scent of cut grass. What keeps me awake is not the noise of the guards, or the muffled screams in the neighboring blocks, but the exact memory of the moment my fate was sealed. Stay with me, because I am going to tell you how a single yes said to the wrong person can erase every right thing you have ever done. In 1992, I was a 32-year-old man who believed he had total control over his small universe. I worked as a diesel engine mechanic in a noisy industrial zone where the smell of burnt oil and the sound of tools were the soundtrack of my days. I was known for the precision of my hands and the honesty of my work, a man of few words who found pride in fixing what seemed beyond repair. My routine was simple and sacred. Wake up early, face the heavy grease that insisted on staying under my fingernails, and return home with an exhausted body but a quiet mind. I was the pillar of a small family, an ordinary man who paid his bills on time and saw no reason to fear the future. Back then, the world felt solid and safe under my tired feet. In the blue-collar suburb where I grew up, there was an unwritten law that was worth more than any civil code: absolute loyalty to childhood friends. To us, abandoning a partner in trouble was the greatest of betrayals, an unforgivable sin that stained a man's name forever. I carried this belief like an invisible tattoo on my soul, a chronic inability to say no to those who had shared the hot asphalt with me in my youth. I saw the brotherhood of the streets as a safe harbor, never realizing that this same safety net was, in fact, a hangman's noose waiting for the right moment to tighten. My loyalty was not based on malice, but on a dangerous naivety that made me ignore the warning signs when old friends knocked on my door, asking for favors that seemed harmless to someone seeing only the surface of old friendships. On that rainy Tuesday night in October 1992, the world inside my house seemed shielded from any external storm. I was in the kitchen, feeling the heat from the stove and the comforting smell of toasted bread that filled the room, while helping my 3-year-old daughter Sarah eat her soup. I remember the sparkle in her eyes and the texture of the plastic tablecloth under my elbows. The radio played soft music in the background, and my wife smiled as she organized things for the next day. There was nothing extraordinary about that moment, except for the deep peace of an honest life being built brick by brick. I was a respected father and professional, totally unaware that those were the last hours of a normalcy I would never experience again outside these cold walls of concrete and steel. The wall phone, with that long coiled cord I used to stretch to the limit, rang at exactly 8:14 in the evening. I can still feel the cold plastic of the receiver against my ear and the sound of the rain beating furiously against the kitchen window glass. It was Jimmy, a friend I had known since childhood who always had a special talent for getting himself into deep holes. His voice was trembling, loaded with a desperation I had never heard before, muffled by the constant noise of the storm outside. "Artie, for God's sake, my car broke down 2 blocks from the convenience store on 5th. I just need you to get me out of here fast," he pleaded, appealing to that street brotherhood of ours. In that second, a knot tightened in my stomach, but the habit of loyalty spoke louder. I said nothing to my wife, only looked away as I grabbed the truck keys lying on the dining table. I remember the weight of the frozen metal in the palm of my hand and the questioning look she gave me. A look of worry that I chose to solemnly ignore because of the rush. I gave a quick kiss to the top of Sarah's head, who was still distracted with her soup, and walked toward the front door, feeling a strange hesitation in every step. When my hand wrapped around the metal doorknob, the cold seemed to pierce my skin and go straight to my heart, as if the house itself were trying to hold me there, in the warmth and safety of my home. I was about to trade my daughter's laughter for absolute darkness. Outside, the rain was a gray curtain that made it hard to see, and the damp air chilled my lungs as I got into my old work truck. I shoved the key into the ignition and turned it, but the engine only coughed and complained, refusing to start on the first try, as if the vehicle itself had a conscience I lacked. The metallic sound of the engine trying to turn over in the cold felt like a desperate warning, a last chance fate was giving me to give up, get out of the car, and go back to the arms of my family. I insisted one more time, ignoring the premonition that was eating at me, and finally the engine roared, releasing black smoke that mixed with the fog of the deserted street. I accelerated, leaving behind the yellow light of my porch, not knowing I was driving into the abyss. When I arrived at the location, I didn't find Jimmy's broken-down car, but Jimmy himself, running toward my truck with a canvas bag and a smoking gun in his hand. Before I could process the metallic click of the door or his gasping breath, blue and red lights cut through the rain, reflecting in every drop on the windshield. Panic hit me like a physical blow when Jimmy screamed for me to accelerate, and in a moment of pure blind shock, I stepped on the gas. We didn't go far, only 3 blocks before the world stopped in a screech of tires and the cold metal of handcuffs biting my wrists. Sitting in the back seat of that patrol car, I realized the smell of gunpowder from Jimmy's clothes had transferred to mine, marking me forever with a crime I never planned. The trial felt like a blurred nightmare in slow motion, where my life was being dismantled by men in suits who didn't even know my name. Under the felony murder doctrine, the prosecutor argued that I was as guilty as the man who pulled the trigger, simply for being behind the wheel during that failed robbery. I sat there, looking at my wife's tear-stained face in the gallery, realizing that my reputation as an honest mechanic was being erased by every cold word spoken in that courtroom. When the judge finally read the sentence, life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 40 years, the air left my lungs. It wasn't just a sentence. It was the sound of a heavy iron door slamming shut on everything I loved or hoped to be in life. That first night in the intake cell was a brutal introduction to a silence so loud it felt like my eardrums were going to burst. I paced back and forth in that tiny space, my boots echoing on the concrete, desperately trying to replay the last hour at home to keep reality at bay. I kept thinking of Sarah, waiting for her bedtime story, her little hand reaching for mine, and the realization that I had lost that moment shattered me inside. The cold of the institutional blanket and the metallic taste of the air were the only things I had left to hold on to in the absolute dark. I was no longer Arthur the mechanic. I was a ghost in an orange uniform, starting a long journey into an isolation that I knew, deep down, would never truly end. The first 10 years were like a thick fog that refused to dissipate. In the beginning, I still counted the days by making small scratches on the concrete wall. But soon the space ran out, and I realized that time in here doesn't flow. It simply rots. I watched the summers pass only by the increase in the stifling heat rising from the courtyard, and the winters by the biting cold that pierces through the rough wool sheets of my bed. Gradually, the letters that arrived frequently began to thin out, and the photos of Sarah I received showed a girl I could no longer recognize. She was growing up without me, and every millimeter she gained in height was a kilometer of distance opening between us. My youth was consumed by the sound of slamming gates, turning my face into a mask of permanent fatigue. In the 5th year, the divorce papers arrived in a crumpled tan envelope, delivered by a guard who didn't even look me in the eye. Signing that document was like burying a part of me that still believed in miracles. The pen's ink felt like it weighed a ton as I renounced the title of husband, accepting that my wife had the right to seek a life where the sun wasn't filtered by bars. The love we built in our little house collapsed under the weight of a sentence she had no obligation to serve with me. That night I sat on the cell floor and realized my front door wasn't just locked. It had been torn down, and someone else was taking my place. I became a number, a forgotten record in a cold metal file. My hands, which were once capable of taking apart and reassembling a diesel engine with my eyes closed, began to betray me as the decades progressed. Severe arthritis set in the joints, a direct consequence of the constant dampness that emanates from the stone walls of this maximum security prison. Today, my fingers are thick and stiff, useless for any precision work that requires the delicacy of a mechanic. It is a silent torture to look at my hands and remember the strength they had when I held a screwdriver under the hood of a truck in 1992. Now, they can barely hold a pen or button my uniform shirt without a sharp pain running up my arms. I lost my profession, my physical identity, and the only thing that made me feel like a useful man to the world outside. In 2008, I received a letter from my aunt saying my mother had passed away. It was a dry blow, without immediate crying, just a void that opened in the middle of my chest. While the world outside said goodbye to her with flowers and prayers, I was here, watching the funeral through words written on cheap stationery. I couldn't smell the flower wreaths. I couldn't carry the casket. and I didn't even have the chance to ask for forgiveness for destroying the hopes she had placed in me. Grief in prison is a lonely and sterile experience, where you must hide your pain so as not to appear vulnerable to other inmates. I cried in silence, muffling my face in the thin pillow, feeling that the last threads tying me to my previous life were being cut one by one. 34 years have passed, and I have become part of the architecture of this place, as institutionalized as the bolts on the doors. My life is an infinite repetition of mechanical routines. The morning count, the thin coffee, the gray courtyard, and the return to the cell. The sound of the steel doors slamming in unison at 9 o'clock has become the only lullaby I know. A metallic crash that warns that another day has been wasted in the void. The world outside has changed. Technology has advanced, and the people I knew have become strangers. But in here, time is an ice statue that never melts. I feel that the oxygen in this corridor is impregnated with the dead dreams of thousands of men, and I am just another ghost walking through hallways that never lead anywhere. I live in a silent war in here, a battle that takes place between who I believed I was and what reality proved I am. For a long time, I consoled myself with the idea that I was a man of my word, someone who didn't turn his back on a brother in need. But the truth, that acidic truth that corrodes judgment in the early hours, is that this pride was the weapon I pointed at my own head. I confused loyalty with stupidity, and that inability to say no to a childhood friend was what ripped me from Sarah's arms. Today, I understand that the brotherhood of the streets is an illusion that dissolves the moment the cell lock turns. While I rot here, Jimmy disappeared into the world, proving I sacrificed my life for a loyalty that was never reciprocal. Sometimes I look at myself in the small, polished metal mirror above the stainless steel sink, and I don't recognize the old man staring back. That 32-year-old man who loved engines and tomato soup died on that night in 1992. And what remained was this stranger with a hollow gaze and trembling hands. The emotion that dominates my days is not hatred for the system or anger at the judge, but a paralyzing guilt that weighs more than any iron chain. It is the belated recognition that I was the architect of my own disgrace, building my own prison with bricks of fear and misplaced pride. I carry the weight of knowing that the people I truly should have protected were the ones I hurt most with my supposed honor. This void is my true life sentence. 2 months ago, while waiting in the infirmary line to get my arthritis medication, the guard handed me an envelope that had arrived by mail. I sat on the peeling wooden bench and, with trembling hands, carefully opened the paper so as not to tear what was inside. There was a color photograph of a woman about 35 years old, with a radiant smile, holding a chubby baby in her lap against a sunny garden background. It took me 10 whole minutes, staring fixedly at those familiar eyes, until my heart almost stopped as I realized that woman was Sarah, my little Sarah. The baby was my grandson, a human being I will never hold, whose scent I will never know, and who will grow up hearing that his grandfather is just a distant shadow, or a shame locked in a cement box. In that moment, The silence of the cell after I put the photo away inside an old prayer book was the loudest sound I have ever heard in my entire life. I realized, with a clarity that only absolute pain provides, that I am not just a prisoner paying for a mistake. I am a ghost haunting their past without having a place in their present. I sacrificed real life, my daughter's first steps, the warmth of my home, and the chance to be a present grandfather because of a single phone call from a man I haven't seen in decades. The realization that I threw everything away for a loyalty to someone who has already forgotten me is my true death. I died in 1992, but only now has my spirit understood that there is no way back for those who choose the path of shadow. The lesson life has taught me in the hardest way possible is that misplaced loyalty is, in fact, a slow and cruel form of suicide in installments. Often we pride ourselves on being men of our word, on being there for those who need it. But we rarely stop to evaluate if those people would be willing to carry the weight of our chains. Time does not accept apologies, and does not return the years you waste protecting someone who doesn't deserve your devotion. A single decision based on the fear of saying no to the wrong person can erase, in the blink of an eye, all the right decisions you took decades to build. Do not confuse friendship with toxic complicity. For the price of being faithful to someone without honor will be charged directly from your freedom and the peace of those who truly love you. Understand that time is the only resource you possess that is truly finite and absolutely implacable with fools. When you choose a side or a friend, you are, in fact, betting your future and the future of your family on that choice. Do not allow the weight of a childhood debt or the distorted concept of street brotherhood to blind you to the fact that when the iron gate closes, you will be alone with your regrets. True loyalty should be reserved for those who build their lives by your side, for those who sit at your table, and for those who will miss you at dinner every night. The rest is just noise, a trap disguised as honor that will leave you old and bitter in a cold cell, looking at photos of a life you never lived. I am not here to ask for your pity, because time has already devoured any trace of self-pity I might have had in these decades of isolation. I am here to make you look at your own phone and at the people you call brothers today, in the heat of your freedom. How many times do you answer calls you know you shouldn't answer, or accept dangerous favors from those who would never be there to hold your hand when the judge strikes the gavel? You might think you are a good man for never saying no, but learn from this old man. Kindness toward the wrong person is a death sentence for those who truly matter in your life. The urgency of existence is not in what you achieve, but in what you decide to protect before fate takes away your right to choose. Evaluate who deserves your loyalty. The guard is already coming with the count cart, and the corridor light will soon dim, warning that another day has been subtracted from my existence. I will stay here in the dark with Sarah's photo, imagining the scent of my grandson I will never hug, while the silence of this cell returns to be my only companion. Think carefully about who you let into your life and who you choose to protect, because freedom is a crystal that accepts no mending. If you could go back in time and disconnect that phone that changed everything in your trajectory, where would you be now, and what would you be doing with those you love? Write your reflection below. because hearing you is the only way I have to feel human. I am here, listening to the metal of the keys in the lock. But you have the world out there. Take good care of it.